So the first question I have for you is how and where did you find wrestling, and in what way would you say it's impacted your life?
Well, I didn't really find wrestling. It found me. And what I mean by that is I wasn't a big fan of wrestling. I was actually a little intimidated by wrestling. My brother was a wrestler, my older brother. He did really well his junior year. He could not wrestle his senior year. I think it was very clear from the coach, our head coach, Al Miller, that wrestling probably ran in the blood. So they picked me out really early. I think my seventh grade year is when I started wrestling, and seventh, eighth, all through middle school and high school, I was learning to love wrestling, but I was still, I hated to lose.
Mhm.
I didn't approach it very well, so I was really struggling with the passion for wrestling. But at some point, it kicked in because I went from struggling to win a match to winning matches to realizing, winning was my ultimate goal, not looking for ways to not lose the match. Just
Right.
basically hang, try to figure out a way to be successful without giving up anything. So I became more aggressive. It changed my style. It made me more aggressive. Wrestling definitely built confidence that I probably would not have gotten anywhere else, given the nature of wrestling, how tough it is, just how much you have to be committed if you want to succeed at the highest levels. So you can't, there is no easy way, there's no easy path. It did teach perseverance. That was one of the major things I got from wrestling. You may not get what you're looking for right away, but if you persevere, eventually it's going to come to you.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you make a great point there with the continuing, persevere and work through it. And I think, in a sense, a very relatable thing to that. And, I've stated it before, and I think there's always room for it. Is this sport serves as such a great way to expose people to adversity, and very often.
Absolutely.
And it really, especially young athletes or athletes across the board in general, uh, it really gives you an opportunity to learn how to work through stuff and overcome it and work to better yourself for many different reasons.
And I think that, that was important for me. The adversity in wrestling, um, you can't understate, just how much that impacts you as an athlete or and as a person. You're out there by yourself. You're matched up with an individual that wants to beat you as badly as you want to beat them.
Right.
Depending on how you're matched, you have to figure out how you're going to come out on top. And it's challenging, but once you're able to accomplish that, it makes all the difference in the world.
Oh yeah, no, I think the being able to flip a switch in a way, and you see so many examples of wrestlers who are off the mat, extremely nice, humble, outgoing people, but then they step on the mat, it's all business.
Yes.
And they could become somebody that you may not like as much, especially if you're on the losing end in that match. But you have to be able to do that, flip that switch and be able to take care of business and put what you have in the toolbox to work.
It's a very intimidating sport. It really requires you to dig deep and to look for things in yourself that in your day to day, you're not looking for that. You don't have to turn things on and off so aggressively, but in the sport of wrestling, you're right. It does require you to flip that switch in some ways that you're not looking at the individual as an enemy, but you have a goal to accomplish. You have an
Right.
objective, and you got to make that happen.
Absolutely. And I think also you look at one, I think if you take the layman person and you have them look at the sport of wrestling, they don't initially see all the factors that go into it and a lot of the stuff that happens, per se, behind closed doors, all the tough practices, the morning workouts, the lifts, the conditioning, the cutting the weight, everything that goes into that, Tuesday night duel, Thursday night duel, or weekend tournament that's on the schedule.
Absolutely. And the amount of time you sacrifice, and it is a sacrifice because it really depends on your goal and your objective. When I realized leaving high school that I had an opportunity to go to college, that was my next objective because that was my best avenue to going to college. And wrestling then became a necessity for me in that scenario because the scholarship was extremely important, and it really challenged me to push through that adversity because a student athlete sometimes is perceived as having extra benefits, or I don't know, maybe they're even thought of as having it easy in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of the most challenging things that you can go through when you're in college is being that student athlete that has to perform, has to practice, has to prep, and also take care of that academic side. So you really gain as you get higher in the level in sport of wrestling.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned the the idea that a student athlete, especially in college, might have a little easier avenue. If anything, like you mentioned, especially in wrestling, where the room for scholarships is so tight, um, when it comes to the budget or how many full scholarships are available, you look at most guys that might be on quarter scholarships.
Right?
And even if you're on a full scholarship, quarter scholarship, whatever, you're still having to really, if somebody is studying 5 hours, you're having to study six. And while also combating working out in the morning, working out in the afternoon, driving to Michigan for a duel or wherever it may be, and then coming back and having to make up work. It's just such a process.
It is, and I think part of that challenge, is what builds character as well. Because I mean, all of those challenges collectively, really, I mean, they just make a perfect storm. Because as you say, traveling, the just the preparation and gosh, the cutting weight, that piece by itself adds a whole nother element, and that's probably for a whole nother day and a whole nother conversation. But it creates a considerable pressure on the wrestler that you just have to figure out a way to overcome and break through.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hit that wall, and you're going to want to quit. I've wanted to quit numerous times, and it was very apparent that nothing was going to get easier. I was going to have to persevere.
Absolutely. And, I think that's really, especially in wrestling, makes the taste of victory a lot sweeter. Whether that be All American status, like you've achieved, or winning a national title, or winning a state title, or whichever way of victory appeals to someone. I think after all that hard work for it to come to fruition and pan out the way you want it to, or go the way you want it to, makes just all more satisfying.
Absolutely. I don't think I didn't do many team sports, and being successful in wrestling seemed to add more pressure. The higher you achieved, the more pressure that you felt. In my situation, I really had to turn my mindset into an aggressive um, viewpoint. I had to put the other person on the hot seat. When I wrestled an opponent, I had to imagine that that opponent was shaking in their boots when they got on
Mm-hmm.
the mat with me, and there was no reason, with all things being equal, that I should lose. I had to really adopt that because that wasn't the mindset I started out with. And when you get in those matches and you get in those situations where it's really, really close, and the only way you're going to overcome that opponent is maybe by a point, maybe by a last second move, but something that requires somebody to make that move at the last moment. You only close that gap when you put yourself in that mindset, and that's what I really had to do was really put that fear and apprehension to the backside and say, look, what am I worried about? What am I concerned about? Am I worried about losing the match? I should be more concerned about how many points I'm going to win this match by. And it was crazy for me when I first made that realization. And I'll never forget, I just gotten back from Desert Storm and back in college. And that was the year I decided I was no longer going to look at my opponent as anything less than equal or inferior, but I was not going to give them the credit of having that fear over me or having that hold over me that somehow or another they're going to win or they're going to have an advantage because maybe they're ranked in the top five, maybe it's a well established wrestler that you have a tough opponent. But I had to really cross that bridge because it was really really tough getting that.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many obstacles that go along with it, and so many obstacles with every story out there. And the mental part of the sport is so important. And I read a great piece of motivation. I can't remember exactly who read it, and I hate the fact I'm forgetting their name. But the guy's got a whole website full of motivational stuff regarding wrestling, and he had a section about being a state champ. And he made a great point. He said some people ask themselves, you know, am I cut out to be a state champ? And there may be doubters out there, whichever may be, but he made a point. He said, why don't you ask yourself, why not me? Like, why can't I do it? Somebody's got to do it.
That's exactly right.
And even reading that myself, going into this upcoming season, I read that. I was like, he's got a good point. Anybody can do it. And you could be on for those 3 days in March, or you could be on the whole season and it, go perfectly through the rest of the tournament. But if you get hot at the right time, that's one glorious thing about the sport. You can make some noise really fast.
Yeah, and I think one of the important factors that also contribute for me was just the people that I interacted with that actually made me better. The teammates that I had,
Mm-hmm.
the coaches that I had, the people that invested all of that time and effort into at least getting me to a point where I felt like I could be the best out of the best. And that wasn't easy. I mean, that was a process, but just having those people in your corner, it changes everything. It's a game changer.
Oh, absolutely. And, great supporters and great teammates. And it's an iron sharpens iron deal. Kind of staying on that topic of scholarships and UTC and things of that nature. So after finishing out your prep career, you made the move to UTC to wrestle for them. What made you choose UTC as a place where you wanted to continue your academic and athletic career?
I think one, it was convenient. UTC really was on the radar, probably all through high school. I know my high school coach Al Miller was also rooting for me to go to UTC, and so it was just the natural transition, and it was a whole new world. Oh my gosh, going from high school to college and that transition, you may be the top dog in your wrestling room in high school, but when you step into that wrestling room at the college level, you're starting over in a lot of cases.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I mean, and it feels like that because you have to scrap just to see where you're going to be positioned in that hierarchy. But at the same time, it's the thing that makes you better, makes you stronger, makes you more determined to succeed. So I mean, it was a rough transition. The competition was extreme. We had an extremely talented locker room. I mean, like there were guys on the team that I looked up to that were already there when I got there, and I thought if I could figure out a way to hang with these guys or to at least give a good showing, then maybe I'm reaching that point in which I'm much closer to where I want to be.
Absolutely. I agree. And you think about it too with that team, you were in there with some hammers as well, Buckshaw, Thornberry.
Yes.
I think your freshman year, Thornberry was in his last year, and Buckshaw's last year was the 89-90 season. But it was really a great room, and it continued. It still is a great room. But I mean, really, if you look at that time in the 80s and 90s, really tough hammers in there.
Yeah, and I remember those guys, Buckshaw, Thornberry, they stand out. I mean, Mark Allison, Clarence Arrington, he was a beast as well. Chris Artolona, probably the greatest wrestling partner that I could have ever been matched with. It was a double-edged sword. Um, I hated practicing with him, but I loved practicing with him because
Right.
he pushed me even when I knew I was having a bad day and he knew I was having a bad day. He would push me through it, and I hated it every bit of the way. And I did the same to him, and we eventually just learned how to work together as partners in such a way that it really made learning the sport of wrestling at that level much easier for me. And that was during the time that Ethan Reeve was the coach, but just that high intensity practicing and drilling at a level I'd never experienced. It was quite eye opening. And it made me realize there were far more opportunities for me to take advantage of. Be confident in one, my stamina, be confident in my strength, and know with all other things being equal, the only thing that separates you at that point is technique. And once you work out that technique, then there's no excuse.
Oh, I mean, I agree. And you mentioned the practice partners that you have. Was he your primary partner throughout your time at UTC?
He was my drill partner probably for the first half of my time at UTC. So I look at it in halves because there was the half before I went into the military and then the time after I got back, which was maybe a 2-year gap in between. But yes, Chris Artolona was my primary partner, and it was always intense. I think back on those days. Had I not had that experience to work that hard, I probably would have set limits for myself that would have prevented me from doing what I wanted to do in the sport. Because it's very easy to say I can't do this, I can't do another one. I'm done for the day. And the minute that I even looked like I was finished, or maybe at the breaking point, that's when he pushed me even harder. And I learned to do that to him as well. But it really helped us to evolve as a partnership.
But it kind of reminds me, pushing past that threshold. It reminds me of that quote. I believe it's from the Marines. That's always on the back of the T-shirts. Pain is just weakness leaving the body.
Right.
I feel like that definitely could tie into pushing past that threshold and getting a little bit tougher, and that a tolerance going up. And I think that really also goes into um, what Dan Gable said, where after you wrestle, everything else in life is easy or easier. And I definitely think there's a lot of truth to that, because there's just that thought like, oh, I got to deal with this at work or this in my personal life. But you think back to those times where, say, in practice, where you had to go past that comfort zone, do those extra sprints when you were dead tired, get up at 6 o'clock in the morning when, you were going to bed at 1 after getting everything done. You're just like, well, I could handle it, you know.
And I can tell you just from my personal experience, one of the things that I benefited from really was the intense working out, the strenuous requirements. Ethan Reeve was just he developed the physical requirements needed for us to be All Americans. Physically, I don't think that we were less than any other opponent out there, even when you're looking at some of these top tier schools. He worked us hard. He made us stronger. I was stronger than I'd ever been in my life under Ethan's watch. And when I went to the military, basic training, the semester right after, I'd left college, basic training was a cinch. I mean, it was a cinch for me. The physical requirements, all of these other things that I saw many of the other recruits they're really struggling with, they didn't bother me at all, and I attributed all of that to just the intensity of the locker room as we worked out and we really prepped and built ourselves at a high level, and I know that that was the result of just the regimen and routine that we had during that time.
Well, it's a very good point that you make, and a very interesting point about how, because I was just about to ask if that hard work ethic and that hard regimentation translated over to basic training, and getting the opportunity. I've had the opportunity to interview Ethan Reeve and many wrestlers who wrestled under him, and the main thing I hear is he had it planned out. There everything was planned out, whether it be spend 15 minutes stretching and going to 30 minutes of drilling. You had the whole hour and a half, 2 hours. It could be written out, and that's what y'all were going to do.
And if that somehow or another was knocked off schedule because we weren't doing our part, we started over. So
Wow.
I do remember those days when there was a restart of practice an hour into the practice, and you can only imagine how devastating that is when you've already worked extremely hard up until that point to think you're starting over. So if you take that experience versus what I had in basic training, any restarts I had in basic training, because they wanted us all to be uniform, they wanted us all to move as a collective unit and to accomplish common goals. Sometimes we had to restart. Those restarts were very little compared to what I remembered when I was in the locker room. And so it really did help me. And in that sense, I was just amazed at the difference. But that's again the confidence that you get, for one, knowing that you're in shape, knowing that you can be at the front of the pack and sustain yourself, and you're really going to be there when it's all said and done. You're still standing. So that's not an easy place to get to.
Absolutely. But once you get there, though, it's only forward from there, and the benefits are, I would think, endless, because it applies to so much. Whether it be, like I mentioned, job, personal life, other careers, like I'm going to say in the military, or in the emergency service field, or whatever it may be. There's so many benefits to the morals and everything that you learn. Staying on the topic of your career at UTC, looking at 1992, you won the SoCon title at 158 pounds. I believe this was your second SoCon title, right?
Yes.
And then you go on and gain All American status at the national tournament. What was that season like leading up to it, and how did it feel reaching that All American status?
Yeah. It was quite amazing. So leading up to that year, I come back from the military. I think Ralph Manning was the coach at that point, and I met with Ralph, and we talked, and he explained his philosophy. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to do whatever I could to be successful. There were guys still in the locker room like Brett Gustafson, who had become an All-American while I was away in the military. That was very motivational for me because I had an All-American in the locker room. And I don't know if you can imagine just how much of an advantage that is to see
Right.
an All-American that you're working out with, and potentially where you might be able to get if you keep working to get as good or to develop those skills that are necessary to become an All-American. So Gus was extremely valuable for me in that last year because he was basically unmovable. I mean, the guy had so many different ways of balancing himself, and his upper body technique was extraordinary. And, so he was very, very difficult to wrestle as an opponent. But that's the thing that drew me more and more to him, because that was what I wanted to achieve. Guy Harris as well was in the locker room, and Guy Harris was another tough wrestler. He gained All American status that same year, and the way that he went about becoming an All American, it put me in awe. He seemed to have wrestled at least 15 more matches than I did. Every time I looked up, he was on the mats. And so it was amazing to watch that unfold, but it required having those guys in the locker room, guys like Mike Newman. And I know I'm going to forget some names, so I hope none of the guys charge that to my mind. Don't charge it to my heart, charge it to my mind. But those guys were instrumental because I was really measuring my progress based on how well I was doing in the locker room. And the goal and objective was to get after everybody and to make sure that if I'm winning the match, dominate the match. And if I couldn't, keep trying. Didn't always work out, but that was extremely important. So during that year, I was kind of an unknown as well, and we were wrestling a lot of good competition. I remember we went to Clemson and wrestled Pitt and Clemson in a tri-meet, and I had to wrestle the number 5 ranked wrestler in the country who was a 3-time All-American, I believe. Somehow or another, I pinned this guy in the match, and
Wow.
it was one of the most amazing victories that I'd had in wrestling. And just to watch my teammates were celebrating as if I'd won the national tournament. But we were all celebrating. I was always a little bit more laid back, a little bit low key, but it was just from that point forward, now I'm on the radar. And
Right.
now guys are coming after me that weren't really thinking about me before because now I had moved up in these rankings. And then we wrestled. I may have wrestled 3 All-Americans that year and beat them all. And it was really not anything that I didn't look down the road to see who I was wrestling next. I took every match from the time that we made weight and we stepped on the mat. That was the only thing I thought about. And I didn't look at the rankings. I didn't look much at the schedule because it wasn't important if I didn't get past the next guy. And so that's when I started to change my whole view about how I wanted to go out and wrestle. Did I want to lose close? Did I want to try to barely win? No, I wanted to make a statement. And that was one of the things that it was the only thing I could think of, the only thing I could come up with that would allow me to create that safety zone within myself that I'm not letting up, that I didn't do what I should have done, and now I'm regretting that when I walk off the match. And I never wanted to be able to say during that year that I could have done this,
Mhm.
this, and I would have won the match. And maybe I would have been an All-American, or maybe I would have been something else. So that's the approach I took, and it really paid off because I didn't leave anything on the mat. And even in the last match that I had with Ohio State in the NCAA tournament, I knew I had a dislocated rib cage. It was very difficult to even sit up, let alone wrestle. And the fact that I had a match that I really wanted to win, I really wanted to wrestle that match, that was the thing that really stuck with me after that tournament, even after becoming an All-American. Felt like something was still taken away, but that's the way it goes. And it's not something that you look back on as a negative. That is the way it goes, and you just have to overcome those obstacles. Bottom line is, I was able to get the thing I was chasing, and I wanted more, and we always want more, but that's the drive that you have to have.
Oh no, I agree, and I think one thing too, when you look at it, gaining that All American status, Charlie Buckshaw mentioned a similar kind of point to where he talked about the things he had accomplished, and he's like, "Well, I would say this to somebody, and they would be like, well, you're talking about what you want to do, but what you already accomplished, like that's amazing."
Yeah.
When you say it to somebody, you're like, I was an All-American. I mean, that adds you to a list of there's so many great wrestlers, but it adds you to a very historical list, per se. And there's a ton of history um, in that program, and especially in that room when you look at all the names on the board, all the names on the wall, whether it be SoCon honors, All American honors, Coach of the Year, D2 national champions, D1 All Americans. Um, those names are etched in history, along with many other wrestlers that have gone through the program. But to be in the top 8 of that weight class, with a weight class like legends like Pat Smith in there.
Yes, yes. There was even a silver medalist, Olympic silver medalist in that weight class that didn't place at the NCAA tournament. But he got a silver medal at the Olympics. That was Matt Lindland.
Oh, really?
Yes. So he was actually in that weight class that year, but he was put out of the tournament um, much earlier, and he went on and somehow he made the Greco-Roman Olympic team, and he got a silver medal at the Olympics.
Wow, that's a crazy turnaround when you think about it.
Yeah, it was quite the turnaround, and there's a whole nother story related to that, but maybe that might be for another time as well.
But all in all, though, with everything said, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about your career and what wrestling means to you and everything of that nature. I really do appreciate it. It's great to be able to do these interviews and talk the history and learn about different people's stories and gain knowledge and everything. But I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and I commend you for doing this. I think it's valuable to you, and it also acknowledges others. So I do commend you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And like I've always said, I'm very grateful for the opportunity I have to do this, but, a lot of gratitude goes out to all the people that have been willing to hop on and share their stories and their careers. Especially really with the podcast, it takes 2 people to make it work. So I have a great appreciation for all the guests that I've had, and hopefully we'll continue to have.
Absolutely. I saw the guest list and, all those familiar faces. So, yeah, there's a lot of value into what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, a lot of guys like Ethan Reed, Guy Harris. It's like a walk down memory lane, pretty much.
My nephew Quantel, I saw him
Hmm.
in episode 16. So, yeah, it's awesome.
Well, like I said, thank you and take care, and hope to have you back on at some point, maybe.
Absolutely.
All right, take care.